Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second evening with three more of our Kentoneers who will tell us their varied stories. Rachelle will be our first speaker, and here are a few notes about her life. Rachelle is a professional musician, violinist, violist, and pianist. Born in Harrow, she grew up in Kenton, attending Priestmead Primary School and subsequently Harrow County Grammar School for Girls. She studied at the London College of Music, Royal College of Music, Lucerne Conservatoire, and the Vienna Academy of Music. Rachelle played professionally and also taught, which she continues to do. She started at the Brent Music Service and then went to Hounslow Music Service, being promoted to head of the Specialist Music School, and then became deputy manager and interim manager of the Hounslow Music Service. Rachelle was elected Warden of the Music in Education section of the Incorporated Society of Musicians 2008-9. In addition, she was honorary treasurer of the European String Teachers Association British branch for 10 years. She was also chair of governors to Grove Park Special School in Kingsbury, now called the Village School, for 10 years. She's been president of the Rotary Clubs of Hounslow and Northwick Park. During these presidencies, she raised money for Great Ormond Street Hospital, Save a Child's Heart, and St Mark's Foundation Hospital. Rachelle is a liveryman in the Worshipful Company of Musicians and assists with their outreach and developed outreach programs in special schools as well as primary and secondary phases. More recently, she's been appointed a trustee to the British Friends of Herzog Hospital in Jerusalem, the General Girls Orphanage also in Jerusalem, and the Middlesex Association for the Blind. Rachelle is the master of the Aldersgate Ward Club in the City of London and is a freeman of the City of London. I hand over to you, Rachelle.
Thank you very much, Linda, for introducing me. And also, it's going to be a great pleasure to be on the programme with Clemy and Reuven. Well, as Linda said, I was actually born in Harrow. I was born in Hines Road nursing home. Actually, my parents for Sholem lived in Weldon Crescent, and I actually attended a St Hilda's school there, and that's where my music career, if you like, kind of took off, because I very much enjoyed singing and playing percussion, actually. And then my parents of Sholem moved to Kenton, and as Linda said, I'm started at Priestmead School. And because of my love of singing, I was one of 6 pupils chosen to take part at this singing festival where 6 pupils were chosen from each primary school. And that was at Blackwell School, which is now Hatch End High. And there was an amazing moment in this concert, because I can't actually remember the music that we sang as a choir, but I do remember this violin group, about 40 strong from a number of schools, playing Elvis Presley's Wooden Heart, and that obviously made some impact on me. So probably about a year or so later, the head teacher of our school came into the class and said that anyone could actually start violin lessons, providing their parents got them a violin, and it was the first time they'd actually had a visiting instrumental teacher. So I went home and told my parents that I wanted to play the violin. So my mother took me to the London music shop, which was off Wigmore Street, and got a violin. And we had our lessons at lunchtime, and there's probably about 10 in the group, and I was absolutely terrible at the violin. Because I was left-handed, I didn't hardly done anything much with my right hand. Anyway, somebody accidentally damaged my violin. They didn't actually find out who it was, but so my parents then decided maybe it's a good idea if I'd had individual lessons, and that's how I started off. But I was very lucky. The next door neighbour invited me round once a week, and she used to accompany me when I was practicing my pieces, and there was another neighbour, so I used to alternate with them. And about a year later, our next door neighbour said to my parents they'd like to give me the piano, and so subsequently I started the piano. After that, I went on to Harrow County School. It was quite a musical school. I was immediately put in the orchestra, which was very nice, and the sixth formers took a very keen interest in me and used to help me, lending me a metronome and used to accompany me, and so forth. And then I started joining local youth orchestras, and one in particular was actually the Middlesex Schools Orchestra. And we were told by the conductor that it was going to fold because Middlesex was becoming devolved. And if we could lobby our local MP, it would help the cause. So my parents were actually members of the local Conservative Association, and they happened to have a leaflet that Dr. Haslam in Alicia Avenue was having a garden party in his home, and Anthony Grant was coming to be the guest speaker. So I walked down the road and spoke to Anthony Grant, and he was very nice. He was very keen, and he actually tried to keep the orchestra going, but unfortunately he couldn't do anything about it. So that was actually my first introduction to lobbying an MP. So as I said, I joined various orchestras, and then I got a bursary to the London College of Music. So when I was 17, we had a new director of music at our school who was a male teacher, which was highly unusual in those days. And he went to visit the director of music at Harrow School, and he came back and said to me, "Oh, we're going to do a joint concert with Harrow School and with the choir, but you're going to play in the orchestra." So I had the distinction of being the first girl to play in Harrow School, and in fact I'm asked every year to play in the orchestra, so that's really a nice thing to do. So after that I auditioned for various music colleges, and I got into the Royal College, and that summer I actually went to Vienna and the subsequent following year to Salzburg to play. It was called the European Summer School for Young Musicians, but all the teenagers, as it were, and all the attendees of the course all came actually from the UK. But it was a wonderful time, and I think that's what started off my interest in Vienna and Salzburg, and actually possibly becoming a professional musician. So at the Royal College, I was very fortunate. I had three wonderful professors, and I was able to go to a course in Lucerne, and the girl gave me very good advice. She said that I needed to study abroad, so I came home to my parents and told them. And that particular year, two things happened. First of all, I got a job at the boys' school in Harrow, which was quite something. And during the second month of being there, the director of music had a car accident, and I had to take over running the department, even though I was part-time. And the music advisor to Harrow said I'd done such a brilliant job that I'd passed my probationary period, which was really good. And then I did an audition for Vienna and spent a year there. I was actually mainly with Israelis, actually, and it was quite interesting, and took part in the obviously in the Jewish community there, and it was a very good year. When I came back, originally I'd wanted to study in the Soviet Union in Moscow, but the winter was so bad in Vienna that I thought it was a bit too harsh. And then I set about getting some auditions in the Northern Symphonia. I actually went to Rotterdam Philharmonic and English Chamber Orchestra, and I got a audition with the Halle Orchestra, and they invited me to do a trial period, but they took so long about it. I was a bit worried, because the fact is I wanted to start to earn some money, and a job came up in Brent, and there were actually three ladies on this interview panel, and one of them turned out to be the music advisor, and she said, "Our head of strings is going on maternity leave. Have you thought of actually being peripatetic, as it were?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And this was Thursday, and she said, "When can you start?" So I said, "Monday morning." And for 6 weeks, I was actually with the head of strings that was going on maternity leave, and they gave me a salary and a car loan, and that's how it started me off actually teaching in schools. So after that, I then decided that I wanted to do a bigger sort of job, as it were. And whilst I was looking for another position, I had the opportunity of playing for 4 summers in Salzburg during the summer festival. And it was absolutely a wonderful opportunity to see so many students and also young professionals all descending on Salzburg from all over the world, and had a wonderful time. And then, so subsequent to that, a job came up in Hounslow, and they were starting the music service up from scratch. So I actually got the job there as head of strings. And for the first 6 weeks, I actually had to audit the music there. So I visited 70 schools in 6 weeks and had to prepare a report and to decide how we were actually going to organize the string teaching. And I still continue to teach in Hounslow, which I'm really pleased about. But I had so many opportunities to conduct, to play, to do administration, to train other staff as well, and also to set up this school for talented pupils. I also wanted to say that before I left Brent, I actually met Sir Rhodes Boyson. It was actually the Winter of Discontent, and subsequent to that, he invited me to be on his canvassing team, and eventually I actually became chairman of Brent North Conservatives, and also eventually the deputy chairman for London West for Conservative Central Office. And as a lot of you know, Sir Rhodes Boyson did a tremendous amount in Brent for the residents there. And perhaps in particular, I want to would like to say that because my parents of Sholland were involved actually in Kingsbury Shaw, my father Sholland used to get Sir Rhodes to come along when my father organised the Ajax service. But perhaps even more than that, my father had a great difficulty with the Conservative government and then the Labour governments about getting the Normandy veterans commemorations on June the 6th actually recognised. And through Sir Rhodes Boyson, that's how it actually came about. So whilst I was a member of the Conservatives, I had the opportunity to become a governor at the school, and it just so happened that I had 3 schools to choose from, and one of them was actually Grove Park, which was near to Kingsbury Shaw. And I really loved being chair of governors there, and the pupils there were absolutely tremendous. They loved their music there, and I used to go and play there, and their artwork, and also they actually loved their sports as well. And as you know now, the school's been completely rebuilt. Very interesting other aspect of the fact was while keeping up my playing as well, I got an opportunity to lead the Watford Philharmonic from 1989 to 94. They got a very large choir, over 200, and their orchestra was mainly amateur, but there were some professionals in it as well. And we gave 4 concerts a year at Watford Town Hall, which has now become the Coliseum. And it was a very great opportunity for me, not only to coach the orchestra, but actually to play solos as part of the orchestral repertoire. Now, an interesting thing happened that I saw an advertisement in a Strings magazine, which was about 2001, and I got a chance to go to New York to take part in a violin symposium, and fortunately I've been going every 2 years to attend it. However, as you all know, because of can't travel, it's actually going to be on Zoom in the next couple of weeks. So I'm very much looking forward to that. One other thing about Hounslow, apart from all the innovations that we did in the borough, was that I don't even remember, David Blunkett was the education secretary around about 2004, and he felt that all pupils in primary school should have the opportunity of learning an instrument. So I actually pioneered whole class strings teaching. Now that was quite a feat actually, because I didn't want a whole class of 30 pupils learning the violin. So some of them learnt the viola, some of them learnt the cello, and some of them learnt the double bass. And unfortunately, I didn't always get someone to assist me. So you can just imagine that I had to actually tune up 30 instruments rather quickly before the lessons started. But I have to say, 3 classes from various primary schools were absolutely brilliant, mainly because the class teacher was so involved with the class that they used to practice between lessons. So another aspect is, if you remember, in 2013, in memory of my father, Rachelle, as I said about the Normandy landings, I actually launched a scholarship at Speaker's House in memory of him. And we had actually 80 entries for the competition from primary and secondary schools. And I'd hoped actually to have done it in 2019, but it wasn't actually be possible. And just to sort of, on the conclusion really, I've really loved being in the musicians company, because obviously they've put me on a committee where I'm involved with primary and secondary schools, and it's been very interesting to organise projects, not only for one particular school but to do joint projects as well. And actually next week I'm actually involved with a school in Northolt called John Chilton, which is a special school, and looking forward to doing that. So thank you very much for the opportunity of actually speaking about what I've done and what I've achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachelle.
Thank you.
Really fascinating.
Yeah, thanks.
What about the Rotary Club?
Yeah,
we now move on to Clemy Lazarus. She was born in Cairo in 1951. The Jews were expelled from Egypt in 1957. She spent her formative years in Birmingham, and she obtained her teaching qualifications in 1971 and taught mainly in Jewish schools in Birmingham and then in Kenton. She married Len Lazarus in 1974 and set up home in Kenton, where they raised their boys, Robert, Aaron, and Jamie. Clemy pursued a further degree in fine art in 1999, and she had a tiny input in the building of JFS School in Kenton by overseeing the religious content of the creative design of its shul and other aspects of the school. In the art world, she's known for teaching art, both in school and privately, and for illustrating ketubot. In Kenton Shul, she held various posts on the board in the areas of communications, development, and events. Under lockdown, her passions have been walking, reading, making art, and learning. Clemy is currently continuing to hone her art skills and to learn Ivrit with Reuven, and she has enrolled in a swim course for ladies of a certain age. She and Len emigrated to Edgware in 2019, but are finding it difficult to sever the Kenton cord. Over to you, Clemy.
How can I follow such an illustrious career? Yes, well, I'm not even going to try. What I'm going to do is tell you about only the first decade of my life, okay? So, and it's lovely to be speaking with Rachelle and Reuven. So with research, members of my family have been able to trace our ancestry back to the 13th century in Tudela, Spain. My maiden name is Menir, and the Encyclopedia Judaica cites under the section entitled Tudela that Chaim ben Shem Tov Menir was a member of one of 8 prominent decision-making families in the area at this time. The religious upheavals in Spain during the 14th and 15th century saw our family expelled, and so we migrated through southern Spain and into North Africa. And that's how I came to be born in Cairo in Egypt in 1951. I shall now spend a couple of minutes describing in brief, if somewhat simplistic fashion, the contemporary political landscape of Egypt during that period. The events I shall highlight are only those that impacted on my personal life's journey. At this time, Egypt was ruled by King Farouk. He inherited the throne in 1936 at the age of 16. He was young, good looking, and he liked to party. Under his hedonistic rule, Jews enjoyed a comparatively peaceful and prosperous existence. Indeed, the king numbered many Jews amongst his friends. Can you see what I'm seeing? Yeah? Hello?
We can only see you.
Can you see me? How do I get the
You need to click on screen share.
Yeah, sorry, you're absolutely right. Hang on a second. And right, we practiced this, didn't we? And I've
We
forgotten
did
everything.
indeed. There we go.
Have you got it now?
Yes, and click on play.
We can't play. Okay. So the political, we talked about King Farouk, and under his hedonistic rule, Jews enjoyed a comparatively peaceful and prosperous existence. Indeed, the king numbered many Jews amongst his friends, but the political climate was unstable. Egypt had gained its independence from Britain in 1922, but was still very much under its direction and influence. For example, prior to the Second World War, Britain insisted on maintaining a military presence along the line. They gave the king very little choice but to agree to this arrangement. The alternative was to be deposed. This very incident was to be a catalyst for unrest. It was viewed as a great humiliation by the Egyptian military. Add this to a failing economy and you have a perfect cocktail for revolution. And so it was that the generals set about taking control to overthrow what they considered a scandalous, weak, corrupt, and out-of-touch king. So in 1952, King Farouk was deposed anyway by a homegrown army coup. That's when everything changed for the Jews. The person who took the reins was a colonel by the name of Gamal Abdel Nasser. Having assumed control, he then proceeded to style himself as the leader of the pan-Arab countries. It has been said that far from being the savior of the Arab world, Nasser was arguably the most failed leader of his people. In his time, he failed to improve the economy and he led Egypt into 3 disastrous wars with Israel. But this did not curtail his popularity. The people refused to accept his resignation. So in 1956, when the economy continued to be desperate under Nasser, he decided that all of Egypt's woes could be overcome by seizing and nationalizing the Suez Canal. No one in the world imagined that the Egyptians had the means, the technical know-how, or the manpower to pull this off. But Nasser drew strength from his new allies in Russia, and he lost no time in expelling the title holders of the canal, the French who had built the Suez Canal and the English who owned it and financed it. This action was swiftly followed by the Suez War of 1956, involving the French, the British, and the Israelis. And this is where my story starts or ends, depending on how it's viewed. At the age of 5, I fell into the category of alien, along with my mother and 4 siblings. My mother, whose family lived in Egypt for several generations, unwittingly got tangled up in the narrative of the Suez Crisis, and as such was expelled from Egypt. And since we, her children, were recorded on her passport, we too had to leave. So how did this crisis come to involve us? Well, my great-grandfather had worked for the British in India, and as such was a British subject holding a British passport. A British passport is highly prized and is passed down the generations. And this is how my mother came to be considered a British subject too. The fallout of the part played by Britain, France, and Israel in the Suez Crisis was that anyone holding British, French, or French passport was expelled. As for the Jews, or the Zionists, as the Egyptians preferred to call them, well, they couldn't be repatriated because throughout the generations that they lived in Egypt, they were denied citizenship and were thus stateless. Today, this category is illegal under international law. So they gave the Zionists an intolerable time instead. At this point, I would like to point out that as hard as we were going to experience life in the early years in England, the Zionists left behind were to have it much worse. When we reunited with our father's cousin in Israel in 1971, he told us that he, along with all other Jewish men, was imprisoned after the Six-Day War. And as a deterrent to any would-be errant prisoner, the warders singled out the 83-year-old rabbi, strung him upside down by his feet and beat him. So my mother was a British subject, but my father was stateless. Without a passport, my father was unable to travel, but he tried hard to get my mother's expulsion order revoked to no avail. In the good days, life for us in Egypt was privileged. My parents were well-to-do. My father owned a successful cardboard box factory, and my mother had a live-in maid. This is a studio shot of my parents' wedding in 1948. In the week they were married, there was a young rabbi who had just arrived in Egypt, and upon hearing that a young couple had recently married, asked if he could attend one of the Sheva Brachas. The young rabbi was none other than Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, later to become chief rabbi of the Sephardic community in Israel. From then on, my father regularly attended his shiurim. In Egypt, my parents had a huge support system of relatives, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, all living in close proximity. This is a shot of us on a day out with our glamorous aunt and our grandmother, resplendent in her mink coat, and our maid, Fatma, in the background. And here we are in 1955, another studio shot prior to leaving Egypt. So you can see we're a bit well turned out, as they say. But soon you'll see the contrast in our changed circumstances. So the day came when the military arrived to deliver the expulsion orders, and I have a vivid memory of the sound of their boots marching towards our apartment. So in February 1957, my mother, who was at the time 6 months pregnant, was obliged to leave her husband and her family and her support system, and was forced to travel entirely on her own with 5 children under the age of 8 to live on her own in a country whose language, culture was alien to her. She was 25 years old. We traveled from Egypt to Marseille, where my French uncle met us and took us to his apartment in Paris. From there, we went to England, where we were taken directly to a refugee camp in Leeds. The accommodation was essentially army barracks. When that camp closed, after a few months, we were transferred to a camp in Kidderminster. This is me in front of the camp in Kidderminster. 3 months after we arrived, my mother was ready to give birth, and during the time when she was confined in hospital, we children became wards of the Red Cross. Whilst my mother was away, our suitcases were ransacked, and many of our Cacharel designer clothes mysteriously disappeared. Added to this, when my mother returned with her new baby, she found that one of her children was missing. You can imagine her despair. Vivian, age 2, had contracted scarlet fever and was hospitalized. She was, of course, returned later. As you can see, this is my mum on her own at the camp with her new baby reunited with all her brood. It was decided that the new baby would be named Elizabeth, after the Queen of England, in recognition of Britain having given us safe haven. My parents never lost their sense of gratitude. Life in the camp was tough for my mother, and this is my amazing mother cooking for us on a Primus stove at the entrance to our accommodation. Such a stark difference to the studio photos earlier. How do I know she cooked for us on a Primus? Well, a couple of months ago, my brother sold up the family home in Birmingham, and in clearing out our over 60 years of life, he unearthed a parcel containing a bunch of utensils and 2 Primus stoves imprinted with the phrase "Made in Egypt." Clearly, my mother had transported them with her, realizing there may not be any kosher provisions where she was going. This is a picture of what my brother found. My sister wondered what we should do with them. Well, my thoughts were, since they were carefully packed away, they evidently had meant a great deal to my mum. So far from chucking them out, they now hold pride of place on display in my kitchen as a reminder of our life's journey and an appreciation of our mother's indomitable resilience and courageous struggles. At some point, my mother had had enough. The commandant of the camp was an officer called Captain Marsh, and every day she would seek him out to persuade him to ask the authorities to grant my father entry documents. One day, she marched into his office and drew herself up to a full 5'0" height, banged on his desk, swiped all his papers to the floor, and demanded that my father be allowed to join us. To his credit, Captain Marsh did everything he could, and my father was able to join us shortly afterwards. Whilst my father was permitted to leave Egypt, he had to relinquish everything he owned. His property, his assets were all confiscated. So he basically came to England with very little funds. Until today, there has never been compensation forthcoming for Jews expelled from Arab lands. En passant, before leaving, my father did study shechting and received a smicha for it. Again, concerned about access to kosher food. He only ever used his skill once on an unsuspecting turkey, but that's another story. Fast forward a little, and by hashgacha pratis, or many fortuitous and coincidental stories later, with little funds and homeless, we find ourselves transported to Birmingham, aided by the Central British Fund for World Jewish Relief, led by a wonderful, compassionate lady called Mrs. Wolfe. We were housed with 5 other refugee families in 2 semi-detached properties. The address was 20 Park Road, the same road that the shul was located. My parents were very happy for that, since our entire life revolved around Shabbat and Chagim calendars and communal activities. Each family was allocated 1 floor of the building, and we were given the middle floor on the right-hand building. We remain to this day very much in touch with all our Egyptian neighbors. We had an idyllic childhood in this accommodation, with loads of playmates to hand, running in and out of each other's building, regularly meeting up in the communal gardens. We were enrolled in the Hebrew school and received free school meals. We went to Cheder several times a week and walked 40 minutes each way to Bnei Akiva on Shabbos. There were no toys in our home. We lacked for nothing that our imagination, ingenuity, and creative talents could not provide. There was great excitement when Vivian came home from school one day carrying a doll that her teacher had bought specially for her. As kids, we were completely unaware of our parents' financial struggles. And in the form of a little assistance, the Central British Fund for Jewish World Relief provided my father with a handout of £300. As soon as he was able, my father insisted on repaying this concession, and this came as a pleasant surprise to the organization. In the early years, my father was obliged to accept many minor jobs, each one a story of its own. And when he found himself struggling to find any employment at all, my mother worked as a cook for the Jewish old age home. My parents' overriding concern was to maintain a kosher, Shabbostic and Torah true home. And these principles added to the difficulty that my father experienced in finding permanent employment, because the working week in the 50s included working half a day on Shabbos. I'm sure you all remember the story I told you at Shabbat UK a couple of years ago. That story highlighted my father's unshakable emunah, faith and trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the one above. But our parents worked all hours that God sent to try to pull themselves out of poverty. And I remember the many, many times we came home from school. After we had eaten supper, the table was cleared and was then repurposed as a production line. We constructed cardboard boxes by the thousands piled high to the ceiling. These would be delivered flat on one day and then collected the next day fully formed. We would sit around the table, mum, dad, and older siblings. Each of us had a specific task allocated. One would lay out the advertising sheets to the external wrapping. One would apply the glue. One would lay the plain box onto the glued paper and carefully wrap it. And when these were dry, they would be neatly stacked vertically, one inside the other. And in this way, we covered and constructed boxes by the thousand. This was called outworking, and we were paid by the unit. To us children, this was a fun activity, but to our parents, it spelled survival. I remember so well fighting to keep my eyes open as we worked late into the night. No sibling wanted to be the first to leave the table to go to bed. Decades later, I'm happy to report that after many challenges, my father, thankfully, managed to start up his own business and establish himself as one of the leading cardboard box manufacturers in Birmingham. He bought a small company with a non-Jewish partner, ironically called Johnson & Bacon, which soon grew to become a major supplier and changed its name to Midland Packaging. In his capacity as employer, my father never turned away anyone who was struggling and looking for employment. Our parents, decades later, our parents once more took their place as respected and valued members of their community, and a comfortable lifestyle was restored. And I'm very pleased to say that we were once again able to dress in designer clothes and pose for professional photographs. Finally, I just want to share a final photograph and a short video clip. In this photograph are the adult children of 4 of the families who grew up in Park Road. They are seen here at the entrance to one of the barracks of the camp in Kidderminster. They returned there shortly before the pandemic to retrace their steps. My brother is seen here saying to Hillam, in memory of all our parents. And here is a clip of the camp as it appears today. A little newly painted, but very much as I remember it. And I believe that army barracks are once again being used to accommodate refugees today. And there you have it, Clemy's early years. Thank you.
Oh, very interesting.
Well done, Clemy, that was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clemy, for telling us of your most interesting early years with your family. I'm sure there will be many questions coming in for you all at the end. And now we move on to our final speaker, Reuven Vazzan, enthusiastic lover of Kenton Shul and community and our dedicated Hebrew teacher. He has been married to Sharon since 1980 and father to Karnit and Edan. He is one of 4 brothers and 2 sisters who all live in Israel, and he works as a financial planner within the NHS. Reuven enjoys listening and playing music, sport, and a book reader. He has a love of Israel as his homeland and the UK, which has been his main country for nearly half of his life. Over to you, Reuven.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Yeah, I just did now. Did I unmute myself now? Sorry. Thank you very much, Linda, and for Rachelle and Clemy. Fantastic way that it will be a little bit difficult to parallel that sort of level. But there's no comparison here because every one of us is delivering different type of qualities. And I think as a result of those qualities, I think in all of these sort of differences, we are contributing to our own life as well as to Kenton community in a different way. That's what it's all about. Well, my story, the story of my life begins 4 years before I was born. When in 1952, my family immigrated from Tunisia to Israel. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, and you haven't heard anything I said before?
We
No.
heard it all.
Yes, we have. Yes, fine.
We have heard it,
We just lost you for a couple of seconds.
Oh, okay, thank you, Linda. So the story of my life began 4 years before I was born, when in 1952, my family immigrated from Tunisia to Israel with 6 children. Now with this, I would have to do some kind of sharing here. Would you mind letting me share, because can the host enable me to share a document? Yep, thank you. There we go. This is the first passport, the family passport of my family when they arrived in 1952. And family of mom and dad plus 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. You can see here from the bottom left, my sister Tamar, Zichronah Livracha, Eli, my brother, who was born in 1942, Yair, who was born 2 years after him, Carmela, Ilana, and Morris, who died later on. This is a typical sort of picture that we like to keep for a long time, which give us a lot of attitude of remembering the past. Back to that. Well, the arrival of my family in 1952 as a family of immigrated from Tunisia with 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls. And for the next 4 years, they used to live in Ma'abarat Tzemach. These are the first sort of very low quality places that Ben Gurion and all his mates have had to absorb all the majority of the immigrants that coming from all around the mainly Sephardic countries. There were huts, which are metal tin huts, with terrible hot in the summer and very cold in the winter. There was no meat around these 4 years of life, and 2 rooms. But in all that, they actually didn't complain at all, as they were happy to be in Israel. My parents had, during this time, 3 more Sabra children. Nurit, my older sister that was born in Israel, myself, and my younger brother. 3 of us have added to the 6 to become a family of 9. In 1956, we were moved to the villas. I'm saying villas, which is a 1.5 bedroom of semi-detached little flats in the Upper Tiberias, in which we grew up in a very, very lively and vibrant community. To expand on that, I would say there was no TVs there. Obviously, it was the 50s, but I mean, TV only came later on in the 60s. And we used to peep up from neighbors who used to have TVs before us, only in the area. There were no toys, and football, to actually play football, we used to make it out of newspapers and glue. And many more, all sorts of sort of improvisation like that we made in the past. Due to the guidance of my mom and dad, I went to a non-observant school, which I think was something, and in retrospect, I find is one of the most amazing things they've done. Whilst I was having my religious upbringing at home, this wide range of influence was a fantastic combination. This provided me with insight into both secular life in Israel and the religious world as well. And when I was 11 years old, which was back in 1967, in the 6 Days War, and when I was 17, it was the Yom Kippur War. So in between those 2 periods, those two events have instilled a very strong patriotic level of feeling to myself. Plus, in fact, that my birthday was on the 14th of May, which made another reason why I really love my country. 14th of May, 48, that was the birth of the Israeli nation. My dad used to work in the Kibbutz Kinneret as an all-rounder from 1952 till 1970, while mom was looking after all of us, cooking the best Tunisian meals that you can ever think of in the neighborhood. Sharon, my wife, where is she? She used to collect these recipes and use them until today. I developed my love to music through listening to classic music played on the radio from a very, very young age, say about 10 or 9. Well, every morning we used to listen to classic music at that time, something that really catch my ear. I'm also learned music at school, where I enjoyed improvising on a liquid xylophone. Now you'll ask what a liquid xylophone is. It's a do-re-mi type of instrument that was made by an empty beer bottles, which I was filling with water in a different level. by virtue of doing this, I would have a little instrument that was played all the do re mi on the Western, scale, if you like, the ABC, the do re mi. I also quickly learned to play harmonica and guitar, and all sort of mouth harmonica, which I was given as a present. My music education and taste altered by listening to best of rock during my teen life and progressive rock, and soon became a lover of jazz rock later on in my 20s. My education, including the equivalent of 7 A levels, with the emphasis of electronics and electrical engineering. My favorite subject beside maths and physics was English, which I was able to practice with my friends in the United Nations who used to live around the area there when I was just 17. So I had my opportunity to actually practice and talking the language as well. In 1974, when I was 17, I joined the army and served for 4 years. During that time, I was in a reserve tank division based in Rosh Pina, working as a radio transmitter lab engineer. I took part in Litani operation in Lebanon in 1977. The army time was an incredible and rewarding experience that I could never forget. I made lots of friends, some of which I'm actually now in touch with in a very active WhatsApp group. Now, with your permission, because I haven't got anyone to help me on that, I put another picture here. Okay, let me see if you can see that, I think. Bear with me. Yeah, that's me just before I finished the army service. And around the period time of 1975 or 6, when I was sergeant before my last rank, when I just finished. Yeah. Now, during 77, while I was still in the army, I met the beautiful person of my life. Her name is Sharon. Again, I need to ask, where is she? I thought she'd be here next to me. When she was just 19, she was a volunteer in a kibbutz Genosar, a place where we regularly visit here when we come to Israel from time to time. We always go and see our friend Dina, who lived there in the kibbutz, which was very close to Tiberias. After leaving the army, I spent a year leading a production line of a Motorola factory from Tel Aviv, which was based in Tiberias. And later, I spent traveling all around Europe for 3 months as well, with Chaim, my friend, which I thought I spoke to him before. He said he's going to come and join. On my return from that trip, I left Tiberias immediately and I moved to Haifa. There I was qualified as a certified accountant, equivalent to the one in this country. I also took an open university degree in economics as well. And in 1979, Sharon and I reunited. When she came over to Israel for a 10-day holiday, we lived together for 10 months and married in November 1980 and remained in Haifa for the next 10 years. Haifa is a beautiful city and we loved it very much. It was a wonderful time that we had there. Plus for me, graduating as a qualified accountant and a BA degree, our children were born during this time, Karnit and Idan. They both were born in Rambam Hospital in 1985 and 1988. At this time, I was working as a finance analyst for a US manufacturer subsidiary in Haifa, where I gained huge confidence in working in English for a US subsidiary company based in Haifa Business Center, where you used to have Elbit and Elsint and all the other companies there together. Came 1989, we left Israel for the UK in January 1989 and very immediately landed into foggy Edgware, where we stayed with Sharon's parents before moving to Kingsbury. I have worked for the Royal Marsden Hospital as a deputy director of finance, and Sharon as a dental nurse and later a dental practice manager for one very well-known dental practice here at Mill Hill. In 1990, I was headhunted to produce financial costing and pricing models for Edgware and Barnet Hospital, which used to be called Wellhouse NHS Trust, if anyone remember. It's a twin hospital between Edgware and Barnet, and they were included in the first wave of the NHS Trust that was formed in this country in 1990. There were 100 hospitals around the country, and throughout the 4 years, all of these hospitals became NHS Trust. So another little pause. I want to take that one out and share another one. Right. This is us when we used to be as a family together. The kids were young, grew up, and in '97, I left the NHS for British Telecoms when Labour won the general election, if you remember, with Tony Blair.
We haven't got a picture, Reuven.
There's no picture.
Have you got a picture? You
No,
do?
we've got Reuven, but we haven't got the screen share.
Hang on, bear with me. I'll just edit. Thanks for that. There we go. You see it now?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, so there's a family of 4, right? Yes, thank you. Because I can't see what I'm sharing, I'm afraid. In '97, I left the NHS to British Telecom when Labour won the election, yeah? And NHS reforms were actually reversed really brutally by their regime, actually. And very quickly, I moved to Telecom. And later, after 9 years working within Telecom and other retail companies, in 2006, I joined back to the NHS doing financial plans, which is 5-year financial plans for NHS Trust, again, that wish to become a foundation trust. This is the next sort of level of independence that they were giving hospital to run their own affair like a private hospitals. And in 2015, I joined King's College Hospital. That was the story of my professional life now. And effectively, I'm at the King's Hospital until today, doing all the work within the financial planning area. My both children, Idan and Karnit, they were both in Sinai and JFS and at university, Leeds and Nottingham. They graduated as in engineering, economics, and sociology. My daughter Karnit is now 36, and she was qualified as a master in engineering at Leeds University, while Idan was his master in economics and sociology. Idan, my boy, is actually working as a music producer, while my daughter has enjoyed and indulging her life with traveling. We are a dedicated member of the Kenton community since arrival, and mostly over the last 9 years, I was involved with quite few activities, helping the community to be as beautiful as it is right now, which I feel. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Very interesting. Thank you, everyone.
Come in.
Amazing talks. Thank you so much. All very different. Maurice, are you able to man the questionnaires coming up? Does anyone?
Anyone's got a question, if you click on the indication, the hand there, happy to bring you in.
Barbara.
No questions?
Can I just ask one question? All the talks were brilliant, but I'm interested to ask, you lived in the works, and you had a great time, and it was interesting that this week there was a court case about immigrants who came into this country, and they were complaining about the barracks, and as that the conditions weren't good for them, bearing in mind that they had obviously come from abroad in terrible conditions. I wonder if you read about it and what your thoughts were about that.
Exactly. Who knew to complain? We were just grateful to be allowed in and to be, given safe haven. Who knew to complain? The conditions were not good, I have to tell you. It's like a long building with a corridor, and off the corridor are rooms, and we were given 1 or 2 rooms. It was terrifying for my mother to have her children in one room and she in another. I think we all slept together in one room before my father came. The accommodations. Interestingly enough, we came not speaking English, and my mother left the camp speaking Italian. There were so many Italian refugees. It was like just a big, mix of people. No,
You obviously mixing with all the other children, you didn't know any better. So you had from your point of view, you had a great time.
We did. Yeah.
Thanks.
Can you speak Arabic, Clemy?
Yes, in Egypt we spoke Arabic. Arabic was the language of the street, if you like, but the language of education was French. So so we came from Egypt knowing French and Arabic. We actually went to a convent school when we were in Egypt, because the convents were the best schools, and so I have a picture of my class with nuns at either end propping up the children. Yeah.
Any more questions? No? Fine. In that case, I will end the recording and leave you to chat for a bit.